latest breaking news and reviews as it happens, when it happens, only on Q95, the big station. Yes, we certainly love our little Dominica. And tonight, we're continuing to move to revive the spirit of graciousness, love, and peace, prosperity, and unity among our Kalinago and Afro Caribbean brothers and sisters with this edition of the Global View on Q. My very distinguished guest tonight, Justice Dr. Irving Andre. We are expecting educationist and sociologist Mr. Simeon Joseph to join us in a little bit. But we're going to get going with Justice Dr. Irving Andre. It's possible that economist Dr. Thompson Fontaine may join us a little bit later. But tonight we're looking forward to hear from you, really. Tonight is really the people's voice. There's so many things to talk about, so many issues to deal with that I know you have lots of things on your mind. We'd like to hear from you. Let's discuss all of them tonight. This is your time tonight. So here's some talking points that for our discussions tonight. The implications, the fallouts, the questions of illegitimacy, illegality, and immorality of what many describe as a sham snap general election, the constitutional, moral, and ethical issues that overshadows this snap general election. Sir Dennis Byron's preliminary report on electoral and campaign finance reform recommendations, emerging allegations about possible constitutional reform that could provide for an office of executive president. The election observers reports, we heard some of their findings, their observations and recommendations after reviewing the circumstances surrounding Dominica's recent snap general election processes. The politics of Caribbean leaders, their silence in the circumstances, the neutering, as we say, of the CCJ, the disregard of their strong recommendation, and those indeed of Sir Dennis Byron for electoral reform so far. Then there were the derogatory and threatening voter intimidation comments allegedly made, well, maybe not so allegedly made by party handlers on the campaign platforms and many more things of that nature. But how do we move forward? What do we do? Do we need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission? Should whistleblowers be encouraged to come forward? What inspiration can we get from religion to change the course of our history? How do we rebuild our democracy? What is the role of the church in politics? We hope some of you can help us to answer those questions. What is the role of patriots going forward after that snap general election? So what is the process going forward into healing the nation from this political divisiveness brought into our Christmas season by vicious political campaign rhetoric? What was different last week, Wednesday morning, 7th December, one day after the highly controversial snap general election? Now we know that former Health Minister Dr. Irving McIntyre, MP for the Roseau Valley constituency, is to be the next Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister of Dominica, among other portfolios, and he will have the task of revitalizing a failing economy with no known background, experience, or expertise that we know of, that I certainly know of in finance, in economic planning or management. Are there many other square pegs in round holes as well in the other ministerial assignments? What is the way forward now for Dominica society? It's much needed community, family, brotherly, and sisterly love. We need that so much. The way forward for our economy, or democracy, or human rights and civil liberties. What is the future, really? What is the future of free and fair elections in Dominica? Will this be seen by June 2023, as was hinted by Sir Dennis Byron, as a possibility? Are Dominicans ready and resolved to truly unite and fight to preserve their democracy with free and fair elections within a framework of modern electoral laws and campaign finance laws and regulations? Are all these values under threat now from this snap general election that was likely intended, in fact, to avoid electoral reform recommendations, but paid for with some $600,000 of the people's money? Is this $600,000 now just wasted away Meantime, DLP leader Mr. Skerritt has hinted that he does not intend to remain in office much longer. He said this past campaign was the last time he would be on a political platform as a candidate. The question is how long will he when well how will he live, in fact? How will he live? When will he leave? Will he be prepared to meet with a cross section of the society and discuss a way out of the divisiveness that has gripped the society? Pitting brother against brother and sister against sister, family against family, sector against sector? Or will he ensure that implementation of proper electoral and campaign reforms shape his departure? What will, in fact, be his legacy? So, as we prepare to embrace our 45th anniversary of independence in November of 2023, Dominicans unifying at home and globally around the preservation of the democracy, the human rights, civil liberties, and free and fair elections, and a general election conducted on a level playing field, possibly, maybe, hopefully, before November 2023, before we're 45 years old. My distinguished guest, Dr. Justice Irving Andrews, here with me, and hopefully Simeon Joseph later, and maybe Dr. Thompson Fontaine will help us unravel the answers to these burning questions. We will discuss, as usual, the good, the bad, the ugly, the dangerous, no anger, no malice, no personal attacks, no vilification, no divisiveness. Let all ideas contend. We're just trying to bring back civility, caring society, and progressive economic and cultural practices. And of course, always recognizing as an imperative the true resilience and sustainability of our Kalinago and Africarian brothers and sisters. So we urge you to call in, tell us how we can all together take a stand, make a fresh start before the dawn of the 45th anniversary of our independence in 2023, and to build a modern society and economy in Dominica with work, good wages, wealth for every Dominican as a main goal. So let's all put Dominica first again. So please stay with us in this space. Let's enjoy a great debate. Let's get the answers to your questions. Certainly, we'd like you to be part of the solution tonight. So wherever you are in Dominica, in the region, globally, let your voices at home and abroad take priority tonight. Call in, join the conversations. All right. Now, as usual, as before I go to Dr. Andre, I just wanted to give a huge shout out, as usual, to and hugs and much love and appreciation. A big thank you to all our healthcare providers and frontline workers and other public officers who are all doing their best, often working under difficult conditions. So please follow the correct advice, guidelines, and protocols and be safe. So happy to have you with us tonight. Welcome you warmly and embrace you wherever you are, in every nook and cranny, in every village, every community in Dominica, in the region and globally. Thank you, Sherwin, as usual, keeping us on the air. Thank you, Lambi, for directing the calls from the consoles tonight. Happy to have you back, Lambi. Let's get started. As I go first to Justice Dr. Irving Andre to get the conversation going. I mean, starting, of course, is hopefully with his analysis of what he saw coming out of the circumstances and issues surrounding the recent snap general election and the new ministerial assignments, and the prospects, of course, for real electoral and campaign finance reforms that would ensure an even playing field and the best chances for free and fair elections in our cherished little nature island, and thereby help us to restore democracy and ensure a decent quality of life and living standard that we all desire for this generation and those to come. So you get the first word, Dr. Irving Andre. Over to you. If you're muted, you should unmute.
To Mr. G, and good evening to Brother Lambi and Shilwin, and good evening to your listeners, and good evening to all Dominicans at home and abroad. Let me say that I wish everyone a very joyous season of Christmas. Obviously, this is a time when we think of the good things in our lives. We think of the cheery greeting of glad tidings of great joy I bring. We think about the various songs which speak about the glories stream from heaven afar, and heavenly hosts sing Alleluia. We think of sorrel, we think of eggnog, we think of black cake soaked in spirits on high, so to speak. We think of gifts, but not of electoral reform, obviously. We speak of the best of human tidings and human nature. We speak of the Almighty Father, we think of him, the one who was friends to publicans and sinners. Publicans, obviously, is a word for tax collectors, those on the lowest rung on the hierarchy, the Jewish ones who were reviled and treated as the wretched of the earth. We think about lepers, the one who saved lepers. We think about the one who extended a helping hand to ladies of the night. We think about the good things which reflect the reason why many of us have faith. This is the context in which we're having this discussion. This is in the context in which we're assessing the so-called snap election. This is the context in which we are thinking of the act of a directorate charged with the responsibility of protecting the Constitution, who has done everything in its power to run amok over the provisions of the Constitution. And that was done for one reason: perpetuation of power as a means of self-aggrandizement, as a means of amassing as much wealth as possible on the backs of the people. You made much, Mr. G, of the composition of the new cabinet. You described it, as so many others have done, as square pegs in a round hole. I would more aptly describe it as snakes in a crab hole, because the purpose of these pegs in this hole is deliberate. It is basically to ensure that all power reposes in the ultimate leader. But I don't want to spend too much time about discussing the composition of the cabinet. I would rather direct your listenership to those who've been appointed advisors to the cabinet, those discarded ministers who've been brought back to the trough. And we have to look at the context in which that has been done. Dominica was almost destroyed by Hurricane Maria. Thousands of people were left homeless. Many fled Dominica. Thousands had to contend with the ravages of the environment because all they could afford were tarpaulins over their destroyed homes. Many lost their jobs. Many Dominicans contended with an existential crisis of poverty and lack of basic means to sustain themselves and their families. Up to today, there are persons who've been buried by avalanches who haven't even been recovered, because that's not our priority. Then there was COVID-19. And even with the advent of assistance from NGOs, organizations such as the World Health Organizations, it was not found necessary to extend a helping hand, just as Pierre Charles had extended his hand in 2004 for help from his brothers, his apostles. But no one took his hand in response. And Dominicans who sought assistance post-Maria, post-COVID, got no helping hand in return, despite the fact that organizations such as the World Health Organization donated some $30 million for precisely that purpose. Civil servants had to contend with 1% wage increase. Teachers at the state college had to take action to get a modicum of respect. Bus drivers had to do the same. At least one was beaten publicly just to get what they deserve. And here it is. You have discarded ministers, those who had fed at the trough for years, those who had amassed huge personal wealth, those who had done so shamelessly without any regard for the poor and suffering. They are given jobs with ministerial salaries to continue to feed at the trough. One was given an ambassadorship. One drank the wine of contentment. Or is it wine? I'm not sure. I'm not an expert about these things. And who is going to pay for all this? The very same taxpayers who were denied any assistance post-Maria, post-COVID, particularly those who were regarded as the publicans, particularly those who were regarded as the Samaritans of their day, particularly those who were regarded as the lepers, political lepers. They were not regarded as deserving of any assistance. And yet these folk who have been feeding at the trough for years, after they have been publicly discarded, they are brought back. They are brought back to feed at the trough at the expense of those who have virtually nothing. That is what we have to deal with at Christmas. During the Christmas season, during the spirit of good cheer. How shameless! How more shameless can you be? How much more brazen can you be? How can we take any solace in any pronouncements about this is my last election? 5 years ago, wasn't there a pronouncement that after 2 years I will leave this palace where I am paying $64,000 of taxpayers' money to live? When Dominicans had tarpaulins, many Dominicans, I would say, over their homes. How much more shameless can it be? And we understand why some of these folk who were brought back as advisors and ambassadors would jump in with glee even after they had been unceremoniously dumped, because they knew the price of being dumped was to be enabled to continue feeding at the trough at taxpayers' expense. And remember, those people of Portsmouth, oh, what a pity. Those who lost their livelihoods with the advent of the departure of York University. They see nothing wrong with that. It's as if they're saying silently, beat me, like the sucker in Black Plain when he was beaten by a pastor, for God's sakes. Beat me, if that is the price I have to pay. Gaso défoncez moi. This is where we're at. And this is what we have to deal with when we speak about where do we go into the future. The road is long. It will be a tough fight. And we may be diverted by offers of negotiation, for God's sakes. Come, let's talk. But you've just stolen the elections and you want to talk? You've just saddled with Dominica with this monstrous debt, not only with your new cabinet, but with your special advisors. What can they advise you about? They're not specialists. They have no professional training or professional designation. They're in this thing for their financial skin. What negotiations are you offering to those who dream of a better Dominica? Isn't that the usual offer? to blunt your resolve to change things, to go forward? How can you take solace in any offer to let us work things out together? The very actions of December the 6th is a negation, is an abortion of any intent to resolve those problems that bedevil Dominica. This is a season when we should be dreaming and talking about the rule of law, the triumph of morality and religion over the vices of greed and self-interest. And yet again in December, we've been confronted with this monstrosity that is eating away at the Dominica body politic. And yet again, those circumstances are asking us in very clear language, what are you going to do? And so this is the challenge of the new administration, the new WP leadership. Those are the groups that have joined the fight for free democracy, for good governance, for the rule of law in Dominica. Coming together under a common banner, a common platform, to fight this fight for goodness over darkness, to fight this fight for salvation of your country, not for greed, not for ladies of the night in Macau, but to give your relatives, yourself, your family, your children, a hope for a better life, not to be pariahs in their own country. And the question is, how do we do that? We certainly know from the good book that a house divided unto itself will not stand. We certainly know that the Father helps those who help themselves. We certainly know, again, another admonition from the Bible, whatever you do unto me, whatever you do unto the least of my brothers, that you do unto me. And we certainly know the story of David faced with these Herculean odds, armed only with a catapult. And I can understand from my personal experiences just how momentous that victory of David's was, because growing up in Portsmouth, I hunted along with a number of young men of my age. Little birds called sikies with catapults, Mr. G. I don't know if you Google YouTube, you'll find out the meaning of a sikie. And I can tell you that the shots I fired, little pebbles at those sikies, were so feeble that the sikies, some of them would pick up the stone and throw it back at me. That is the strength I could muster. So when I read that parable of David and Goliath, I understand the enormity, the amount of strength required for him to have mustered, to bring down that behemoth which stood in front of him. And that is a metaphor of where we are. To what extent can we mobilize our collective strength to wage this noble conquest of good over evil? And that is the challenge that our leaders face. Set aside notions of individualism. Set aside notions about only me can do it, only I have the wisdom. And come together with a number of programs. Programs directed, for example, at fundraising. Programs, for example, directed at grassroots mobilization. Programs directed at the empowerment of councils in villages all over town or all over the country. A consistent and systematic campaign to raise funds at the grassroots level, beyond making periodic appeals to people in the diaspora. That is part of it, but that cannot be the sum of it. Because through grassroots efforts, you empower people. You give them a sense that they're in this together. You give them the sense that their contributions and their skills and their resources are valued as individuals, as somebody who can do, as persons who can contribute meaningfully to this grave existential fight that we face as a nation. To feel that, make them feel that this is not a time when they are on the lower rung of the hierarchy of social importance. To make them feel that what is valued, what they bring to the table is valued. Because the last time I read a book, it says the poor person who contributed this penny to the church, his contribution is just as much or even more than the rich man who contributed $100. Mr. G, I'm not talking about you. I know you can contribute 1,000. But they have to be made to realize that their contributions is as valuable as the next person, irrespective of whether or not they attended university or otherwise. This is not a time for establishing some kind of hierarchical approach to redemption. There's another parable, because we're in the Christmas season, very short one, where I think the book talked about the two persons who went to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee. The other was a publican, the lowest of the low. The Pharisee lived in Beaubois. The Pharisee lived or dined at Kempinski, Gasson, or Jungle Bay, these places of ill-gotten gains. And one, the Pharisee, prayed, and his prayers reflected his exalted status in the society. He thanked the Father for what he's done. And the publican, the one from whom nothing was expected, humbled himself, and he authored a prayer, clothed in his humility. And in that simple parable, the message was being sent. It is not your status that will define who you are, but the humility you bring to the table. And our leaders have to reflect on these verses. Brother John Lewis will tell you, Monsignor John Lewis will tell you more about these things, and Pastor Rodney at the appropriate time. But we have to reflect on these things and realize that the strength of the chain lies in its weakest link, so that we have an obligation to engage even those who are financially vulnerable, even those who are regarded as being rough around the edges, those who don't speak the English language with a fine tongue, those who speak from the heart. We have to bring one and all to the table of redemption, of mass mobilization, of grassroots agitation, because this is a fight we can't afford to lose. What more signals or messages do we want? The last election was an in-your-face repudiation of everything related to good governance, a spit in the face of the CCJ, of Sir Dennis Byron, of the OAS. How many more times do they have to come and observe elections and make the same recommendations or make the same utterance? The recommendations have not been followed up, have not been implemented. Well, how many times are you going to say the same thing? Is there something about coming to Dominica that you love? Is it the crabs? I'm talking about, crabs that you eat, just so that nobody misconstrue what I say. Is it the coconut punch? Is it being dined and fettered? Why come if you're going to say the same thing? Why waste our time? Why insult Dominicans while not detailing the flagrant violations of our electoral laws, the illegality of the elections? Why not indicate that bluntly? What are you afraid of? And what about the Commonwealth? I'm not going to spend too much time because that whole thing is a farce, an insult to Dominicans. It is no wonder the English talk about Baroness Shameless. They could do that in Dominica, but they cannot do it in England or any other larger country. But what is even more frightening and sad is that we have to put up with it. We are not people. Are we not? Are we not equal? Should we not be respected as any other people? Should we not have free and fair elections as any other community or country, especially in the West? Don't we deserve the oversight of organizations that profess to act with integrity and decency? Should there not be fidelity to the rule of law in Dominica? Nupa Muntu, are we any less than anybody else? These are some of the questions we have to contemplate and meditate upon as we reinforce ourselves to deal with this crisis that does not seem to want to go away. Forget about all these pronouncements about this is my last election, Mr. G. The
I
money
wanna,
is.
Dr. Andre, I know we're going to spend some time on going forward. Huh? I know you have a lot more to say. Here's what I wanted to bring you back to a little bit, to this one thing. There is something about this that I just do not get. And maybe it's just hiding there in plain sight and I cannot see it. You might be able to help me to understand this. So you have a number of ministers in government. They have won their seats. They are currently MPs. They are ministers of government. They have another 2.5 years to go before another election is constitutionally due. And they're being told, listen, we're going to have an election. You are not going to be a candidate. That means you have a sitting MP who won the last election and who has no reason to think he's going to lose, he or she is going to lose the next one. And they're being told, you're not going to be a candidate, which really means that if you're not a candidate, if you're not an MP, you cannot join the opposition in a vote of no confidence in me. So I mean, I'm silencing you by telling you, I'm called an election, so you'll no longer be an MP. You're not going to be a candidate, so you cannot be an MP. And then you turn around, and these people are given offers, as you've said, of ministry, or of ambassadorships, or of consultancies, or advisorships, and get it salary. Now, there's something about that that is difficult to understand. Why would somebody do that to themselves? Because here's what it is. Effectively, because you're not an MP, you're not elected, it means you're not in parliament. You're only there if you become a senator at the pleasure of the prime minister who appoints you there. It means that he put you in there, he can fire you. And you can't say a thing because you're not an elected member of parliament. So you cannot do anything about putting your head together with any opposition forces in parliament for a motion of the confidence. How do you, I don't know, how do you justify this kind of behavior? Nobody seemed to mind this happening to them. What is, I've seen people dancing on stage and all that.
Mr. G, you are missing the point. The point is the monthly check. That is the justification for that humiliation. How many times does someone like Ian Douglas have to be humiliated? Sing, Gaso. You have a nice voice. And he sings, much to the embarrassment of his family. He goes, it's a very simple, there's nothing, there's no magic, there's no complex thing to understand here. That these folks were clearly promised that they would be taken care of, financially speaking. So when they were jumping and they were basically buying on the platform, they were doing so for good reason. And we know it. It's no mystery. We've seen that playbook before. We've heard that song before. So there's no mystery about this. This is exactly what has been used to silence so many folks. Those who own newspapers, may their soul rest in peace. Those who got choice positions over persons who are more qualified than them. Do you know, Mr. G, have you thought about how many careers have been blighted, have been aborted, afterward they denied opportunities for promotion, for the sole reason because it was feared that they did not belong to the fold? Have you thought about some of these things? How many individuals have been sidelined? Not because they did anything, not because they're not qualified, but on the contrary, because they are. And they are perceived to be a threat to the directorate. And this is what's happening in Dominica. This is what is so sad in Dominica today. Think of the economists that we have. The former political leader of the Freedom Party, Sanford from the territory. Joshua Francis is an economist. Obviously, we have Dr. Fontaine. And we have others who've left. Why? Because of perception that they don't support the directorate and therefore they are undeserving of certain positions of authority. A small country like Dominica that could use every help that it can get to provide for its people. And we are systematically cherry picking on political grounds persons who should be tasked with assisting Dominicans in their hour of need. A country which does that shall perish. The question is, what are we doing to save ourselves from that fate? That is the $64,000 question. What are we doing to rescue the country?
Yes. Now, what I want to do, I want to ask Lambi very early to open the lines, because I mean, tonight we want to take a lot of the calls, because there's so all the things that we're raising. I'm pretty sure that many of our listeners and viewers, and many of you are already on Facebook. Thank you for being with us on Facebook. I know that you yourself, you have comments and issues that you would like to air, and maybe you have some of the answers to some of the questions that we might be posing. So I want Lambi to give the numbers out so that you can call, and Lambi will just interrupt us at any time so we'll take the calls.
Good evening. The Global View and Q. The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, 305-432-9624. Let me run those numbers one more time. 449-309-596 and 97, 616-4257, 305 432-9624, and we already have a call on the line. Good evening, caller. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead, please.
Why is Andre jealousy so boring? I think it's very
449-309-596 and 97. Sound like a mosquito that's calling there. Let's move on.
I guess.
Hold on. On the overseas line, good evening. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, good evening. I have a question.
Could you raise your voice, please?
Hello?
Yes, you're very low. Could you raise your voice, please?
Yes, I have a question. Did they find oil or gold or diamond in Dominica recently. When I look at the size of the cabinet, it looks like Dominica has a lot of money. Is it passport money that's going to pay all the salaries for all these different people that they have in that new cabinet? Lord have mercy on the people of Dominica. This is ridiculous. Thank you, gentlemen. Have a good night.
No, that is a very, very valid, very important question, Dr. Andrew, because this oversized cabinet is very costly. Here's the thing, and Alam, you can disturb us, interrupt us anytime as we go along. So just take a call if you have to, right? Here's the thing, Dr. Andrew. You're looking at something that has repeated itself over and over again. You know, you have a very large cabinet. It's oversized, in fact, for the population that we have in Dominica and the size of cabinet that we have, the kind of money that we're spending. But again, the return on that investment in the paying for that size of cabinet, what is it that we're getting? I mean, I'm hearing the Prime Minister. Lam, you want to take a call?
Yes,
Go
we
right
do have
ahead.
a call on the line. Caller, please go ahead. Caller? Yeah, the person shied away, so let's move on.
Yeah, so I'm hearing the leader of the Labour Party saying all the time, I'm changing the slate because people are not doing their work. They're not there when the people need them. They're not doing their work, but they keep saying that. And so the work is not getting done. Obviously, the economy is in shambles. We see crime is increasing. We see the society is disorganized. We see many of the businesses not doing as well as they would like to do. We see young people leaving the country and just traveling. You want to take another call?
Yes. Good evening, caller. Please go ahead.
To Dr. Andre, and good evening to Father of Democracy, Mr. G.
Evening.
Good
How are you
evening.
doing?
This is Bruno here, Lumby. I want to register my position again on the big station. That given the fact that I have, commit myself with regards to the reform for and on behalf of the people of Dominica, I go all out and to support Byron, to support the government, to support the Electoral Commission, to support the opposition, to support everybody that expressed their interest for a better quality of voting process in Dominica. I stand with that. And we've done so much. And for today, when the man said to us that, look, he will adhere whatever Mr. Byron come up with, he will agree and sign. He will agree. He'll agree with Lennox Linton. He'll agree with everybody. He told us in National Day address that, look, he's going to do all within his powers that we would have a better election process. And today we find ourselves without reform into a sham, nonsensical waste of money, waste of people's time, where the economy of Dominica has already crashed. So my position is that I won't be recognizing, and that is my means of protest, because I did make mention in one of the consultations that if we do not get the reform that is required for the people of Dominica to make the livelihood and our democracy remain and stand in Dominica, once we deny that opportunity, I will protest. So that's my form of protest. I will not be recognizing this government. I will not be recognizing Roosevelt Sheridan. I call on everybody not to recognize this man. This man, he seems to have a wicked mentality towards this country and the laws of this country. And we have a man sitting getting $32,000 that is more deadly than Roosevelt Sheridan himself. So I won't be recognizing that government. All we have to push is that we will get a new government, our reform within 6 months' time, and back to the bowl and have a new government and a new cabinet. So for now, my position, I am the Vice President of Concerned Citizen Movement, and I will ask my other members to join in, not to support this government, not to recognize this government. We doesn't have a prime minister in Dominica at this point in time. So we need fresh elections with electoral reform. Thank you for the opportunity, Lambi, and God bless.
And thank you for your call. And Lambi, Andre, just to carry on from where the caller left off, I will come back to the other matter in a minute because I think it's important. You have another call, Lambi? Let's take it.
Yes, we do. Hey, caller, please go ahead.
Hi, good evening, Lambi, and good evening to Mr.
Familiar
Sheridan.
voice.
Gregoire?
Good evening.
Good
That sounds
evening.
like a gentleman
Good
I know.
evening.
Andre.
Yes, sir.
This is Dr. Dion George, and I
Sounds like him.
to express my gratitude for contribution to country and expressing views with all the effort to build a better democracy. And I think that's the effort here. And so the media has always been the watchdog of the nation. I want to make 3 points, Lambi, if I may. And it's all about an animal. It's called a dog. And the dog is from Plato. Plato, the Republic. He wrote his first thesis. But he said that people need to learn from animals. The first one I would say is this. I want to give credence to the united force that decided to abridge the sham elections and that the people stood in solidarity with them. And I mentioned that, and I said I would use a reference as a dog. Lambi, you have never seen a dog run like 5 dogs behind one agouti. You have never seen that. What they do, they hunt in packs, similarly to lions. What that means is that they plot, they strategize, they come together. I mean, you'll never see 4 dogs running behind one animal. The point here is, I'm wanting to see the opposition forces come together, strategize. One go north, one go east, one go west, and you achieve the goal. This is not from me. This is from someone called Plato, one of the biggest persons in history and philosophy who has given views on how government should work. Talking about government, he also made reference in his book called The Republic. He said, dogs, if a dog approaches someone it knows, it's very friendly. If it meets foreigners, it's kind of a bridge and it might bark, it might be even violent. And Plato used that analogy or allegory, if you want, to say that governments should treat their people well and not foreigners. The interest of a government should be based on the servants, its citizens, and the better well-being of its public. And it says dogs know that. A dog will be with you, and if it knows that you're not its master, but you come in there all the time, it knows you. And so it treats you well. And others it treats with suspicion. The point here is, I think, Plato is saying that people need to treat their own people well. And the last point I will say, which I think is very important, I want to give credence to the people of Salisbury tonight. I mean, it has been said on the radio, and I think it must be repeated. What I mean by that is, consider the police force. I don't have much time, and the little time I have, I just want to just hit the point hard. Plato gave a view as to who should be the leaders. And on QFM, we have had this about likability and what is the best leader. But Plato's view of who is the best leader, he says, is the guardians. And he says, what about the military folks? What about the farmers? What about the business folks or construction folks? He says, well, consider, if you have a dog and a farmer trains a dog to be the guardian of the sheep, and believe you me, Lambi, I have seen dogs who have been trained to take care of sheep. He says, what if one of those dogs eat the sheep? Then that dog is not trained. And maybe you should kill the dog. So he's saying that the dogs, and I'm not referring to police officers as dogs because they did an excellent job in Salisbury, but they have to be trained to know that their job is to put order and protect the people. The same way a sheep dog will guide the sheep while the farmer go and plant watermelon. The point here I think Plato is referring to is that our military folks, our police folks should be there, like they did in Salisbury on Sunday, to protect, to put order, and to celebrate. And if there are police who came to hurt people, that's a dog that needs to be trained. Ultimately, the point here is that knowledge is important. You have to have knowledge and training. I want to give credence also to Thompson Fontaine, who I saw in the crowd dancing with everybody, being so happy, and it's like he has nothing to be afraid of, as opposed to the incumbent who has a lot of security around him everywhere he goes. Well, I mean, in my personal view, my father being a soldier, I would advise Thompson to be a little more vigilant, but it just gives credence to the fact that he do not have, as we use in our colloquial language, he don't have cocoa in rain. So he can be out there and he can enjoy it. At the same time, I would like to say that, yes, he can enjoy that, but I just want to leave the 3 points with the dogs. The first point, in summary, is to strategize, hunt in pack, create a strategy to get a goal. The second point, be very vigilant when it comes to foreigners and to treat your people well, those you know. And the third point is where you know somebody and where you are given the order to protect and serve, you shouldn't kill the sheep or abuse them, but lead them in order and protection. And so that's my contribution tonight. I thank you. And thank you, Dr. Andre. Thank you, Mr. Sheridan Gregoire. And that's my view. And thank you so much.
And thank you, Dr. George.
Thank you. I can respond to a couple of the points made, if you don't mind, Mr. G.
Right. Mr. Lamb, you
Let
have
me,
another call?
Oh.
You want us to take a call, Dr. Andre, before you go? Or you want to go ahead?
Sure. No, take the call. No problem.
Caller, please go ahead.
Yes, good evening, Lambi.
Good evening.
Good evening to the entire panel. Lambi,
Amen.
we took for a long time in the fight, and I listened to Mr. Byron, Mr. Linton reading a letter which was Mr. Byron, the Prime Minister's response to Mr. Byron. And in this response, Mr. Sheridan is saying to Mr. Byron, he took more time than he anticipated. My question to Mr. Sheridan tonight, while everybody was crying, where is the report? What is going on with the electoral process? Which evidence you have to show us that you ever wrote to Mr. Byron and tell Mr. Byron that the people are crying, where is the job he was paid to do? This man continued to lie to Dominicans for too many times, and we still allowing him to. It is a shame. Good night.
Good night. Dr. Andre, I mean, yes, let's go over to you, because I know that you wanted to respond to a couple of the things that, the points that were made by Dion a moment ago, and there's some other things that the other callers made we can look at as well.
Okay, first thing, I know that Brother Lambie cut off one of your callers, but I recognize the voice. He typically calls and say the show is boring. But if it's boring, why are you listening to Gasso? And here's somebody sending me a WhatsApp message. There's a very exciting program on DBS. They just found Snow White dancing ballet at Pont-Cassé with two farmers, one dressed in black pants and red sash, and the other wearing short pants and no shirt. Why doesn't he go and listen to that program, exciting program on DBS? Why torture your ears or yourselves? Especially when you have nothing to contribute. We know what you had to contribute when you were in Marigot. Was it at the airport, Mr. G? When Sukoyans raided your office? Anyway, the second point regarding Dr. George, he talked about Plato and his comments about dogs, and I commend Dr. George. But let me tell you one allegory that I learned, not from Plato, but from the University of Ballyhoo Town, from a graduate I met at the Rosa Market. And she told me that, you know, in Creole, dogs usually run after those from whom they sense fear, those who are afraid of them. And that is probably something we should meditate on. that when we exhibit fear, when we exhibit an inability to act, an inability to stand up for our rights, we encourage those in positions of authority to continue their assault or to continue their fight against democracy and against what is right. So here's another lesson from our experiences with dogs that we can learn from, in addition to those mentioned by DVS. Mr. G, you asked a very pertinent question. What is the price of a bloated cabinet? What benefits are we getting? Mr. G,
Right.
you are asking the wrong question, and I say so with the greatest of respect. The question you should be asking is, what benefit is the political directorate getting? And I'll tell you what it is. Their silence. I hope I can
Mm-hmm.
speak a secret to you. I hope I can speak of something that your listeners will not hear.
No,
He
nobody
is
heard it.
buying.
Nobody heard that.
Okay, he is buying their silence. They cannot talk about what's happening inside as long as their pockets remain filled to the brim. They wouldn't talk about the excesses. You remember this fellow Zampoli or Zamponi or whatever it is? I don't know.
Yeah.
When he filed a lawsuit and he told the world that there were mysterious accounts where the proceeds of sale from passports had been deposited as opposed to being deposited into the consolidated fund. After a while, he went silent. And Mr. G, isn't there a hotel owner, Gassel, who was a major critic of the government? And guess what? After they took no further action to collect that debt, he became a virulent critic of the UWP. So if you want to sell your soul for a mess of potash, for a few dollars more, the price you must pay is to sell your integrity. Unless, of course, you want to become a born-again preacher, preaching the virtues of good governance, of an honest leader, while you wait to go back into your air-conditioned SUV where you paid nothing. While you do so to gain a little cushy treatment from the powers that be, you sell out every religious tenet that you hold so dear to hold to your bosom. That is the price which some men of the cloth, not all, are paying. And that's why we have to give respect where respect is due.
Mm-hmm.
The pastors who appear on your program on Monday evenings, even a Monsignor, this is a tale of two Monsignors. The one who's in the charge of the cathedral and the one who's selling his soul so shamelessly. Because they are just men. The fact that they may wear robes doesn't mean that they're better than you. Some take their roles more seriously. Some take their vows more seriously. But they are just men. And they show us that, quite frankly, we can't put our trust in pastors or other religious leaders. We can put some trust in some of them, but not in all of them. So we have to look at those things, those happenings, those shameless demonstrations of falsehood. We have to look at it and say, you know what, we can do better because we have it within ourselves. Many of the persons who are taking to the streets on Wednesdays, who are calling your programs, these are not rich people. These are people I grew up with, and in my day growing up, we would frown on them. They were the Samaritans who were the wretched of the earth. in the time of Jesus. When they walk on one side of the street, you walk on the other side. You don't want to be associated with them. But these are people, many of whom are now showing leadership. And you know what, Mr. G? They have the most to lose. Because they have very little. They have very little.
That's right.
So that's why I don't join some of my folks in the diaspora who harshly criticize the folks on the ground. You know why, Mr. G? I grew up with the admonition that you don't judge somebody, human being, until you walk a mile in their shoes. And I'm not asking you to walk a mile, just a foot or two. Because my questions are, who are getting persecuted? Who are being deprived of jobs? Who are being charged with bogus criminal offenses? They, not me in the diaspora. Who is not getting any benefits because they had the audacity or they have the audacity to be faithful to their beliefs? They, not us in the diaspora. Who are treated as pariahs? Who are the subject of taunts and threats that they should be the victims of hot water being thrown at them?
Lamb, you want to take a call?
Yes, I better do that right now. The caller on the line, please go ahead.
Yeah, greetings, Lambi, Mr. G, and Justice Andre. Good evening, sir.
How are you doing?
I'm good. Mr. G, listen to this, right? The best weapon, the best tool Dominicans have to get the job done. They are not using it. They have never tried it. And I don't know if they have the willpower to even exercise or use that tool. And that tool is massive demonstration, peacefully. I remember Skerrit saying he don't like people to put gun in his head. The gun he was talking about is the people. The taxi drivers come out, he give them a little thing to shut up. The bus driver come, he give them a little thing to shut up. But the people themselves have never come out. And that is the only solution, because Roosevelt Skerrit clearly and have demonstrated over and over again, he doesn't want electoral reform. Because we remember what his Attorney General tell him, that anytime he bring a reform, his winning legacy will be destroyed. I mean, it's common sense. And these people, they are not getting it. All they need is massive demonstration in Roseau. And tomorrow we will get in that reform. And another thing I want to say, the coalition force have to stay together, because now is not the time about UWP and Freedom and CCM and no. Dominica is what has the problem now. Our democratic system is at stake. Our freedom of expression is at stake. Our economy is at stake. Our very survival as Dominican is at stake. So they have to stay together, mobilize the people every weekend or every night. They should be in a different village, and after 2 weeks, when they bring the message in every chronic at every corner of Dominica, then we just go down Roseau. That's the only solution. And the three biggest failures, that's what he bring back. Ian Douglas as trade minister. Look at the state of our economy. Farmers cannot export nothing. Ian Douglas was tourist minister. Look at the state of our tourist industry. Blackmore as security minister. Look at the state of the level of crime and violence in Dominica. Ostrich at this great side. These guys, what they going to advise him for just how to hide the money and how to keep the money. Mr. J, one question, and that's my last thing I'm going to say. Do you know Dominica has a bank in Switzerland? And if you know, I would like to know when it was established and by who. Thank you, so I'm listening.
Well, I mean, I think we heard that from a gentleman called Mr. Zampoli. Is that right, Dr. Andre? I think
yeah,
Mr.
we did. And when he was disclosing or about to disclose the secrets, a settlement was reached with him.
Yes.
And that's exactly, but that is the pattern. And as your last caller says, look, all this thing is self-evident. I mean, we do not have to prove that there's no interest in meaningful electoral reform. I mean, what is there to prove? You know, I had a debate with the Attorney General a few months ago, and I basically asked him to tell the Dominican people in which other island did any Attorney General's office support the kind of electoral reforms that he was advocating. I'm yet to hear a reply. And this is supposed to be the lawyer of the people. He couldn't reply. And what was there to reply, to be quite frank with you? You know, this is not rocket science. And the other thing which will go down as quite shameful is the silence of the leaders in the Eastern Caribbean, those who hold office. Many opposition parties have voiced their concern about what is happening in Dominica. Many union leaders have expressed solidarity. Internationally, there's been concern expressed, but there has been a silence from these prime ministers in the Eastern Caribbean because they're all in this thing together. Because if we delve deeply enough, we will see that in some fashion or the other, they are beneficiaries as to what's happening in Dominica. Do you think it's coincidence that, was it a BWI, British Virgin Islands leader, when he was arrested and apparently questioned about what's happening in Dominica? Do you think they were, the American authorities was asking about the height of Mont Diablo there? Or why are the sands black? Or how many hands are in a bunch of bananas? Do you think that's what they wanted to know? Do you think it's coincidence that virtually every foreign blank is putting their tail between their legs and hightailing it out of Dominica? Do you think it is coincidence? We have to connect the dots. And we have to be motivated by the picture that emerges. It's almost like a jury being asked.
You know, let's talk about that a little bit. The question of motivating, because you mentioned it earlier and it's coming up. One of the two other callers mentioned that as well. You have a call, Lambi? You want to take it before we go?
Good evening, caller. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead, please.
Hi, good evening, Lambi. Good evening, Mr. G, Dr. Andrew. Good evening, my former English teacher at the SMA. Dr.
Good evening, sir. Good to hear you.
Great. Dr. Andrew, Mr. G, and Brother Lambi, I've raised this question repeatedly. When the Treaty of Chaguaramas was signed in Trinidad in 1973, that treaty that created the CARICOM countries, one of the primary reasons was to ensure that all member states look out for each other, be it in trade, be it in security, be it in industry. And all the signatories to this treaty agreed in principle on everything. Now that our country is in shambles, all these other countries, they're enjoying their democracy, their peaceful elections, their ID cards and everything's okay with them. Now, how about Dominica? Why are these leaders so silent? Why aren't you looking out for us? As Dr. Andre said some time ago, Nupa Muntu? Come on, man. Gaston Brown, Mia Motley, you all are enjoying all your peacefulness in your country. You all tend to regard Dominica through that leader you all have there as if we are invalids, and treating us as though we are your footstools, And it is bothering me, the silence of these so-called leaders of the Caribbean. I'm listening, gentlemen.
Let me just make a comment. I agree wholeheartedly with the caller, not because I may have taught him that 1 + 1 is 3. Let me indicate it, because he makes a good point. Because I've reflected on that, and it's sad, because let's look at Ross University. Dominica is acknowledged to be one of the poorest in the Eastern Caribbean. And let us reflect on one of the biblical teachings. When you see a brother or a lesser fortunate relative in distress, you lift him up. You provide assistance. When Dominica was losing Ross, which accounted for 30% perhaps of the tax it receives, or whatever it is, and accounted for the employment of so many persons, and provided persons with income on account of rental properties to students. Do you think that the Bajan leader called our prime minister and said, Gasson, here are these people wanting to move to Barbados. You already don't have. How can I, with a clear conscience, take from you what you don't have? Do you think she said that or words to that effect to him? No. She was more than happy to grab it. So this is the nature of the relationship we have with some of these folk. Those who piously preach about climate change on the world stage. They're only interested in their own selves.
And
Go ahead.
You know what they say in those circles, Dr. Andrew? They say there are no permanent friends, they're just permanent interests.
Absolutely. But those of us who believe that, we are united by commonalities of history, united by the fact that we're descendants of slaves, and therefore we have this bond, we have this perpetual friendship. Dream on.
Lam, you want to take a call before we move on?
The call on the line, please go ahead.
Yes, hello, good evening.
Good evening.
And thank you for taking my call. Gentlemen, I want you all to let that make sense to me. Roosevelt Skerritt on November 6th called a snap election and decided that he was going to get rid of 9 or 10 of his most experienced ministers, including Rayburn Blackmore. On the Rayburn Blackmore watch, we have seen an increase in homicide in Dominica. Since I've been following the political landscape in Dominica, I have never seen Dominica have no more than 5 or 6 homicide per year. This year, we still have how many days left? I'm not wishing that it happened, more would happen, but we have seen 18 homicide under Rayburn Blackmore watch. Roosevelt Skerritt brought him back as National Security Minister. Let that make sense to me. Dominica is just in a sad situation right now. And it's only the hands of God that can really get us out of that. It is just unbelievable the kind of madness that we see happening in Dominica. In my village in St. Joseph, I heard that Roosevelt Skerritt made a promise that as soon as you get to 70 years, he's going to give you, once you did not contribute no money to your retirement, etc., before, like you never work, before he's going to give you a $300 every month. And based on what I've been told, gentlemen, is that there are grown-ass men, sorry for my language, that's in St. Joseph right now that wishing or wanting to get to 70 years ASAP. Is this for real? Come on. Good night, gentlemen. Bye-bye.
Good night. Thanks a lot for calling. You have another call you want to take?
Yes. Good evening, caller. Please go ahead.
Lambi, good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Evening.
Good evening to Mr. G and Dr. Andre.
How are you doing?
Permit me to respond to the caller before the last, although Dr. Andre touched on it, but I had that in mind to say already. And he was talking about the silence of CARICOM leaders, but how we expect them to speak out, as Dr. Andre said, who grabbed Ross? It is Mia Motley who grabbed Ross. So you expect Mia Motley to come and talk about what is happening in Dominica when she is benefiting what is from our demise? It was Hartley Henry who told us in 2019 all Skerritt election manifestos and T-shirts and whatever were printed in Barbados, and the amount of money they benefited from Dominica. caller, maybe you're not aware of who was which prime minister and the Skerrit was in league to kidnap a guy called Mehul Choksi. Have you forgotten that caller, or maybe you don't know? I just reminding you. And Dr. Andre reminded us of a guy called Zampoli, who was silenced or paid for his silence. I also want to, because they say we have fall brains, you know, but I want to remind our callers about a guy called Chaudhry. I forget his first name. Maybe it will come while I talk him. He was the editor of the Weekly Bliss, a Sri Lankan newspaper, who came out with two damaging evidence pieces of article on Roosevelt Skerrit. And he blackmailed Roosevelt Skerrit that he should pay a certain amount of money, or he would come out with a third article which would have been, David is the guy named David Chaudhry, which would have been very, very damaging. And what happened? A certain prominent lawyer, one of the enablers of Roosevelt Skerrit, who benefiting from all the spoils of the land, was dispatched to meet David Chaudhry. And what happened? The third article never came out. So I just want to remember, it's long this guy has been committing a lot of atrocities in this land, you know, and destroying our country. So I just want to remind the callers of that, because they say we have four brains. So every now and then we have to be reminded of what has taken place already. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for allowing me to express myself.
Thank you for doing so, caller. You're absolutely correct.
Dr. Andre, I was not aware. I've never heard of this blackmail thing, but I certainly have heard about Chaudhry.
I've heard about Chaudhry, and I knew about the silence, and I think the caller is entitled to draw reasonable inferences from the evidence, which is exactly what he's done. Just as you can draw reasonable inferences why, for example, certain persons were virulently opposed to the administration after lawsuits were withdrawn, then they became the loudest critics of the opposition. You can draw reasonable inferences from the evidence, and the caller is entitled to do precisely that.
Here's what I want to do, though. Before we take any more calls, I want us to move, because the caller said, God help us. I think God help those who help themselves, right? Now,
I hope so.
Well, we certainly started talking about the way forward. And it seems to me that many callers said, and quite rightly so, that the idea of collaboration and coalitions is working. I mean, there's a lot more enthusiasm now for what is going on with the opposition groups, because people are sensing that the people in the opposition groups are willing now to collaborate and work together to create one dynamic force to go forward. I think that is working, and we can see that one of the callers said they want to see more numbers. I think we're seeing evidence now of more numbers coming out to rallies. We saw a rally on the Bayfront, we saw one in Salisbury. We noticed that the numbers are increasing. I would expect that the next rally, the numbers will be even larger than the numbers we saw at Salisbury. But you were making a point about this, Dr. Andre. You say in order to go forward, there has to be organization on the ground, there has to be structure. You cannot today just go about things in a vai-vai manner, expect to get results. If you want results, you have to be organized and structured, and you have to plan to get those results. You know, for example, if you go into every month, if you're going to have a rally with 5,000 people, there's a cost to that. There's also an organization structure to ensure that it has to be successful. If you're not organized, it's not going to be successful. You don't have the money to provide the transportation. So I think it's important, if we're talking about people getting together and forming coalitions, it's not just among the opposition groups. It's among all the people, the reasonable and right-thinking Dominicans at home and abroad, who say, look, we want to see some change to bring our country to a place where we can have free, fair elections and our democracy can continue happening, and we can, well, bring it back for that matter. So here is the role that we can play. Can we provide a PA system? Can we raise some funds to provide a PA system? Can we raise some funds to provide a $10 every month or something like that? But there has to be a plan, and people have to know that there's going to be something and it's going to cost so much, and here is how you can participate. And then, as the caller said, if you're not, all politics is local. So it's not just looking at the national level. You have to look underground at each constituency, each community. It seems to me the organization there has to be some kind of a ground game to raise the funds, to organize the various groups, the various interests, and to bring people out, not only on election day, but the days when you have get-togethers like rallies or town hall meetings. There has to be organization and structure on the ground. I think you were making some reference to that a little earlier on, Dr. Andre. I'll come back to you in a minute. Lambi, did you want to take a call before I go to Dr. Andre?
Yes. Good evening, caller. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Lambi, good evening. I will have to call back to tell Dr. Andre I'm not making any inference. And let me jog his memory a bit. In that same article, David Chowdhury accused the Astafan family of funding Hamas and Hezbollah, right? And when he said what he said about the prime minister in his first two articles, and Astafan was mad. He said he's going to sue David Chowdhury on behalf of the prime minister. Somebody called him on Kyrie FM and tell him, are you not concerned about your family name? The guy is accusing you all of funding Hamas, and he said that is his least concern. He was more concerned about protecting the prime minister's name. So having said that, gentlemen, maybe that have jerked your memory a bit. So it is not an inference. That is actually happened. Thank you very much.
Well, I think the caller probably didn't quite get what I was saying. I'm not, well, first of all, I'm saying that that the caller is right to say that the fact that Chowdhury did not print anything after those two initial articles, that raises the inference that he received not kisses or bouquets of flowers, but he received part of the green grass of home, because that is the established pattern. It's the modus operandi of the political directorate. So I'm not questioning what the caller is saying on at all. In fact, I'm saying it's entirely justified, because that's the only reasonable explanation for Chowdhury's about face, his silence. So that's the point.
Lambi, you want to take a call?
Yes. Good evening, caller. Please go ahead with your call.
Yeah, good evening, Dr. Andre and Lambi and Mr. Sheridan Gregoire. And this is why you see I have targeted Mia Motley and Barbados. I've asked my people and them to make a sacrifice. Do not buy Shirley biscuit. Do not buy sunflower butter. Make a sacrifice and find some other butter, find some other biscuit. We need to target Mia Motley economically, because she has done so to us. You understand? She has done so to us, and I quite agree with Dr. Andre that she's all around globe trotting. After she went to climate change at the UN, before that she was in Africa talking about we are all brothers and we have to look out for one another. I think it was Ghana or one of them places where they were holding the slaves. And this woman is a deceiving person, man.
Now let me just say this, caller. I don't think Mia Motley can just take what we have if we don't let her take it, you know. I mean, Mia Motley didn't just take Ross. I think we let Ross go. And she was very happy to receive Ross. I think we have to. Sorry?
She didn't say no.
No, she didn't say no. She said yes.
That's why you're welcome.
Very welcome.
Come here. We'll give you white sand beaches and a Bajan accent.
Well, the point is that why would we want to let Ross go there in the first place? I mean, we have to protect what is ours, and we have to look out for ourselves. Don't expect Mia Motley to look out for us. Nobody else is going to look out for us. We have to look out for ourselves.
That's true. We're supposed to be brothers in the arms. We're supposed to be united by our history. We're supposed to be taking care or assisting those less fortunate. Your point is well taken, that we certainly allowed it to go.
Of course.
But quite frankly, one would expect that, quite frankly, if you're looking out for your brother, if hypothetically you have a brother who is an alcoholic, who is giving away his or her possessions, are you just going to take part of those possessions without saying or trying to assist your brother who is afflicted by this malady of self-interest and greed?
But as we said, in those circles, there are no permanent friends. There are only permanent interests.
Well, we have to understand that and got rid of this crap about, oh, we are all Caribbean people, we are one people and one nation, and all this foolishness and so on.
That's not happening. It's clear that's not happening. I mean, Ralph Gonzalez didn't share that view when we talked about an airport here. He certainly didn't share that view, and he went and got his, right?
Naturally.
So that's not happening. Lambi, did you want to take another call before we go? No, okay. But Dr. Andre, I was making the point, that in order for us to move forward, let's get real. And I see some of that happening now, and I'm very happy to see it. And we can see the level of enthusiasm that's already increasing among all the groups in Dominica now. People get in a sense that, there are better days ahead. They have some hope. It's a little bit more organization now, but I would like to see, in fact, it requires a lot more organization and structure on the ground. It's not going to happen. If, for example, as I'm hearing the coalition groups talking, if it is being said, okay, listen, so Dennis Byron indicated that it is possible to have all this legislation in place, let us say within the next 6 months. By June, everything should be in place, right? It means, therefore, there's a program. There would have to be a program of activities to be on the ground, reinforcing that to ensure that there is that electoral reform. It goes to Parliament and the laws get passed by that time. In other words, this has to be a schedule, and the people have to know that's the schedule. They have to know the events and activities that are forthcoming so they can prepare themselves for that. They have to know what is it that they can do to help, like whether they can put a couple of their dollars in it, whether they can make, make the time to go to and attend this event or that event. The point is, people have to feel they're a part of it, and the organizers, the groups that are organizing, have to ensure now that the information gets out. People want to know what's coming so they can prepare for it. They want to know what it is they can do to put aside a little $10 here to contribute, because this is how it's going to happen. Everybody has to go. If the people have the best interest of Dominica at heart, and if what we have seen from this past election, clearly we have a minority government in place now. Very clearly, the majority of the people spoke. They said, we're not satisfied with what is going on now. We really want to see something better happening in Dominica. We want to give the country a chance to do better. They stayed home. They did not come out. As a matter of fact, I'm not even sure that there's a large percentage of these supporters of the incumbent, I sense, did not come out. Does that mean that they become lackadaisical, they're not enthusiastic? Does it mean that they're losing sort of, sense of belonging to this thing? Do they think now that it is not going anywhere? They're not benefiting from it. They can see a lot of people who may be benefiting, but maybe they're not benefiting in any meaningful way from that. And so people are looking for other avenues. People are looking for some other direction. I think there's an opportunity now to educate people politically and otherwise, and to get them to understand there is a better way ahead. For example, I mean, you cannot tell me that people get apartments and they don't have a title, and they know they cannot afford to repair them. But wouldn't it be better if those people had a job, they had income, they can afford to pay for their apartment, they know it is theirs, nobody can take it away from them? I think this is the kind of thing that people are looking for. I don't think people mind. We've seen it in many different settlements. People don't mind having to pay for their stuff. They just want to know they have the income, they can afford it. And Dominicans are proud people by and large. And they will want to know, this is mine. You can't take it away from me. It's mine. I work hard for it. I'm paying for it. I think people are looking for something new, and it's an opportunity. I mean, with all due respect to everybody, I mean, the fact of the matter is that is the way the country has to go. And I think the only way it can go that way is for there to be organization, and this idea of the coalition and collaboration, I think it has taken root. I don't think anything should be done to derail it in any way. That's what I'm saying. And because we all want what is best for Dominica. Why do I say that? I don't have anything against the Labour Party or against any individual. The fact of the matter is, no democracy can stand by having one government in office for 20-something years. I mean, come on, let's be smarter than that. We have to change our government from time to time, keep our governments at bay. Because when you keep a government there for 20 years and you can see the results are not forthcoming, Not because I say so, because the leader of the Labour Party is saying so. He's saying, you guys are not performing, I'm taking you out, I'm replacing you. And then when he's taking out more, and the only common denominator in this thing now is him. He's the only one who's there. So maybe the next time they're still not performing, they'll have to turn their attention to him. Because it seems to me all the senior people, you took them out and yet you put them back. What does that tell us?
It tells us that we're regressing, we're not making any progress. It's very simple. It tells us that the central consideration is not the welfare or well-being of the state and its citizenry. The justification for these actions is perpetuation in power, keeping everyone silent and content so that they will not threaten like Chowdhury or Zampoli or Jungle Bay to spill the beans. Well, not so much Jungle Bay, but certainly Chowdhury and Zampoli. That they will maintain the secrets as long as they get a paycheck that they don't deserve. Let me again refer to the good book. We're in the Christmas season. I know the book talks about, was it St. Paul or St. Peter? I don't know. You'll correct me. Who was saved on the road to Damascus? Was it poor chap called Lazarus, who was confining himself to perpetual perdition, but was raised from the dead, therefore giving hope to all believers? We do not have the luxury of thinking that those who've treated us so callously will experience an epiphany and will become born-again Christians, turn their backs on corruption, turn their backs on victimization, turn their backs on persecution, turn their backs on depriving people of the opportunities that they deserve. If you think so, quite frankly, Zafedosa, we have to understand that good governance or the fruits of good governance will not be handed to us on tablets of stone. You have to fight for it. You have to fight for it. And that is why it's so imperative that those forces who dream of a better Dominica, of the rule of law, of treating everyone as their brothers, they have to come up with programs, with initiatives based on unity, based on cohesion, based on collaboration. They have to develop a ground game. And if you don't know what I mean by ground game, go and search YouTube for a fellow called Obama. A slate of programs all across the country to raise funds, in addition, obviously, to initiatives in the diaspora. But you have to start on the ground. And you have to start with the realization that every penny will fill your basket. No amount is too small. No contribution is too small, because when you engage people in an enterprise for their own self-interest, inevitably, they will come to your cause, because you're appealing to their better graces. You're appealing to their better angels. Somebody put on Facebook. I mean, I'm so old-fashioned. When somebody tells me Facebook, I go look in the mirror to see if there's anything, if I have a pimple or something. Just shows you how backward I am. So Facebook, I had access to Facebook, and I saw some of the folks at that rally on Sunday dancing. I saw Thompson doing the Sudan version of Basiba, for God's sakes. I saw people and I asked myself, but hold on. 8 of these guys have been charged with bogus charges. All of these fellas on the stage dancing to their heart's content have been deprived of jobs, have been pilloried, have been victimized, have been ostracized, and they're happy. While those who've benefited from ill-gotten gains have more rage in their system, including some of those religious leaders who want to convince us as to the honesty that pervades the circles of government. They're still enraged. They have venom within their system. They will not happy until they see those who urge or yearn for good government crushed. But again, didn't another book said, or was it Martin Luther King who said that crushed earth will rise again? And so we have to play our part in that ascension of goodness, of morality.
Yes, and obviously, Dr. Andre, I think the grassroots movement you're talking about is the groundswell you're talking about. But here's one thing I want to tease your brain a little bit on this. You talked about these gentlemen who've had these frivolous charges of incitement and so on brought against them. It's been many years since they've been going to court, back and forth, going to court, going to court, going back and going to court. And absolutely nothing is happening. The prosecutors seem to be unable to prosecute those cases. I mean, I believe the reason is because there's a lack of evidence to support the charges. And therefore, what do you think? I mean, isn't it something that should happen now? Shouldn't those charges be dropped for want of prosecution? Because certainly, it seems to me this thing that just been held over. It reminds me of what is happening in Russia, for example. I mean, Putin just puts his opponents in jail. I mean, I cannot understand that is happening in our country. And isn't there something that can be done in the court to get these charges dropped? Because there's obviously no prosecution happening.
In many jurisdictions, they would have been thrown out for unreasonable delay or alternatively dismissed for want of prosecution. But we have to understand something, we have to address these issues head on. The magistracy is controlled by the government as opposed to Supreme Court judges or High Court judges, whatever they're called. Many of them are on contract. Many of them are being held on a short leash. And let me remind your listeners that months ago, following the arrest of Thompson upon his return to Dominica, there were serious allegations made against the magistrate who dealt with the case. There were questions about the nature of the bail conditions, which are onerous by any standard. And this fellow was seen outside of the magistrate's court speaking to someone. And at least one online newspaper reported that he was speaking to the security minister, a minister of government. If that was true, and that could easily be ascertained through phone records, that would be a gross violation of the integrity of a judicial officer. That you are speaking to a minister of security while you are hearing a case involving whether or not an opposition member should be granted bail. And I think it was Dominica's Mass in the Cemetery reported, even indicated that the magistrate was allegedly told, but if you don't do this, we will get a Trinidadian magistrate to deal with it. If that, in fact, is what happened, you need no more evidence how low we've sunk in terms of the politicization, or should I say the pollution of the judicial decision-making process in Dominica. It shouldn't happen. And I think I heard Mr. Linton talked about the decision of Justice, is it Galloway's name is? And what the CCJ just said about it. Was that by coincidence? Did he simply make a mistake? Did he simply not understand that the decision would involve the denial of someone who's aggrieved to seek redress from the courts in terms of a potential violation of the Constitution and of the electoral laws? Did he not understand that the decision is made is something which should only have been granted in the rarest of circumstances? He understood it too well. But that's the problem. It's ban movie in Dominica. Anything and everything goes. And it's only Dominican patriots they have to rely on their own inner strengths to save themselves. The region ain't going to save it for you. Look at what the RSS did to Salisbury. Dr. George always keep reminding us of it. You think they could have done that in Guyana? You think they could do that in Jamaica, Gaza? The Jamaicans would just issue them a string of bumble, whatever the word following it is. I can't remember. But as I said, you know what the people normally say? La ba e la ba, befla kasuti. They will pounce on the most vulnerable. And that's exactly what's happening.
But Dr. Andre, I think, however, that when it's all said and done, I think these charges should be dropped, and I think every effort will be made to have those charges dropped for want of prosecution. And I'm hoping that the attorney is looking at that. It just sounds so a little bit, childish to have those charges they hanging for how many years. But here's what I'm taking. We can take some comfort in the fact that what you're alluding to, the whole question of the people getting together, the grassroots movements taking root, we can take some comfort. We see the beginnings of that, right? We see people getting together under the banner of this coalition group, the Electoral Reform Coalition Group. It seems to me, if you were to take a poll, you'd find that probably more than 75% of the people of Dominica want the electoral reforms that we're talking about. I think we can also take some comfort in the fact that the way Sudanese Byron's report seems to be evolving, I get a sense it's going to be 2 or 3 phases from what I've been hearing. You have a first phase and then a second phase and a third phase, but I get a sense that it is going in the right direction. Let us hope it does not get derailed, but we get a sense it's going in the right direction, and hopefully at the end of the day, there will be another national consultation when all of these reports are in, so that everybody can then, in full view, look at these reports and all of the groups that were involved in the recommendations in the first place. All the interest groups can come together and say, yes, we're satisfied, or we need some further amendments. But the point is, if that can be accomplished, and the reason why I take some comfort is because I'm hearing that Sir Byron says not only just going to discuss that with Electoral Commission, but it's also going to discuss that with the opposition groups and all the other parties who have interest, like the Labour Party, the UDLP, and so on, the NJAMs. This is a good thing. So in the end, I think we will get some electoral reforms in Dominica, and very importantly, campaign finance reform must be a part of that, an integral part of that. But then, as we're saying, this grassroots movement that we're talking about must be there, and the numbers have to keep coming out to shore it up, to ensure that you get it. Because that is the only way we're going to get it. If the people come out and demonstrate that they really want it, and they show by their numbers that they want it, they understand that they're going to suffer nothing unless they get it. And then, of course, ultimately, of course, the reason we're doing all of that is to have free and fair election. Let the chips fall where they may. Whichever party is able to persuade and win the hearts and minds of the people will win. Because all we want really is to have good and accountable government, so that we can boost our economy and boost people's living standards and quality of life, right? We have something that's working. And so the young people don't have to be running from the country. Professionals have to be concerned about coming back to the country, and they are not allowed to practice their skills, their craft. This is something that should not be happening at all. And I think it is beginning to show that by and large, Dominicans at home and many Dominicans overseas in the diaspora, they're no longer approving of what is happening, and they're beginning to think, something, we need to move in a new direction. I'm saying that because I noticed some more support is coming in in terms of donations for some of the fundraising activities coming from all over. I can see an improvement in that now. I can see some better turnout in the rallies that are taking place. In terms of the chatter that I see on the social networks, I can see more and more people want to have some kind of change. And even when we saw some of the independents, we saw 2 independent candidates, and one of them now is an opposition leader, a lady from Salisbury. I hope that she gets to a point. I think she's the opposition leader. She may be. I hope she gets to a point. A couple of good senators who can be in that parliament and speak about the question of electoral reform, because this is really all that they can go there and do. It seems to me they're not going to be there to talk about budget and all that. The eyes have it for anything else that happens. But I think they have to use the platform there to speak about electoral reforms and free and fair elections, and to ensure that the program stays with the kind of schedule that Sir Byron was talking about. So hopefully we can have an election. I would like to see a free and fair election in Dominica on the eve, just before we turn 45 in 2023. What is wrong with that? That would be a nice present for our country. You go in 45, have an election. The leader of the Labour Party said he's going. He didn't say when. He didn't say when he's going. He didn't say how, but he said he's going. We notice he's giving up certain things, but he's maintaining everything. You see, if you give up, you say give up finance, you give up, but you keep in governance, you keep investments, you give your wife housing, and you give one of your close associates the finance thing, and so on and so on. It seems to me that you're staying in the loop. And then we hear these whispers about reforming the Constitution, and we hear this little hush-hush talk about the possibility of an executive president. What does that mean? So who is going where? This is the point. What are we preparing for?
Well, we have to prepare to save our souls, and probably this is the only time I'll quote. Is it Buju Banton or is it Jim Reeves? I think there are lyrics in a song which says something to the effect, "We have a data now, so we have to think smarter now. We have a cause, so we have to think more strategically now, in terms of building coalitions, in terms of raising funds, in terms of mobilizing and motivating people to fight on their own behalf." And that is where we are at, quite frankly, in our history. Whether we will meet that test boldly, with confidence and with courage, or whether we will just fall by the wayside, whether we will continue, many of us, not the patriots obviously, to sell our souls for a few handouts here and there, while the Zampolis of this world and certain selected few gain millions of dollars, while we have to beg for a pittance, whether on Wednesdays or whether during the election cycle, when sitting at some drinking establishment, we have to boast about the few dollars we get from a political operative. The choice is ours. You can either embrace your destiny or you can betray it. The choice is yours. It is you to decide. You have your destiny in your own hands. It is you to mold your future, or it is you to cast it asunder. And that is the junction, that is the fork on the road where we are now. The rule of law is not a gift that will be given to us. The rule of law will not emerge through some type of epiphany, some Damascene conversion or salvation on the road to Damascus, a last-minute conversion. The rule of law will be achieved by the conscious actions of people motivated by a desire to mold a future for their children and for themselves, to restore their dignity, which you cannot get in brown paper bags delivered on a dark night. Not on a night when you hear songs, Silent Night, Holy Night, but on a night when you hear, oh shame, oh shame, oh shame. Is that what we've come to? Is that what have befallen us? But let me say this, why there is hope. Not only because there seems to be an awakening, but even in the darkest hour, you have some laborites, whether motivated by conscience, by a sense of what is right, who in their own limited way will show that they understand that what is happening is wrong, and who have reached out to those who have been deprived of meaningful help, who extended a helping hand to some of those, whether on account of blood connections, friendship, or just out of the goodness of their hearts. They haven't come full forth forward because they do not want to incur the wrath of the political directorate, but they have made tentative steps. And it is our duty to make them continue making those steps. and not to be too critical of those. There are some who should be criticized, but let us not forget the venom with which this government has persecuted those who have the audacity not to support them. And there are some persons who have the audacity to say, well, if they come in power, they'll do the same. Many of these people who say that are beneficiaries of what's happening right now. And let me ask them one question. Edward Oliver LeBlanc, Mary Eugenia Charles, Patrick John, Edison James, Rosie Douglas, Pierre Charles, does any of these leaders manifest this virulence against their own people, this scorched earth policy? Even if, assuming without deciding, these folks all had their own passport policy, did any of these leaders divert the net proceeds of sales into mysterious accounts, buy up property under assumed names or under the names of other persons all over the place, whether in Dominica and elsewhere? Did any of them do that? Yeah. So this argument about, oh, they will do the same, is self-serving gibberish. And we have to call out these persons who say that, because many of them directly or indirectly are beneficiaries of wrongdoing in Dominica.
Here's what I think, Dr. Andre. I see a movement, a grassroots movement starting with this idea of the coalition. And I can see the political parties and the various interest groups are getting into it, which is a great thing. I see also that one or two initiatives have started in the diaspora. I see people already are beginning to form little groups and little committees and say, we want to see what we can do. I hear people talking about, okay, maybe we can put together something and send along a couple of PA systems. I hear people saying maybe we can put something together and send a couple of laptops to help strengthen the associations in the various constituencies, things like that. Because if you're going to get organized, you're going to need stuff like that, right? You're going to have websites that are functioning, that you can go out there and make a donation at any time. You need websites that are updated regularly so that the information on the issues, the current issues, are there. You need to have social media that is updated, and there's discussions taking place and exchanges taking place there, and people are beginning to go to groups and looking at the issues and educating themselves about what's happening and finding out what it is that they can do, how they can contribute. I see the beginnings of all of that, but I think there's things that people can do at home and abroad, especially people abroad, because sometimes, there's a little sale in an area in a Walmart or something close to you. You can go there and pick up a couple of laptops because there's a sale, and so people get together and pick up a couple, send it down. Those things help. They can do a little fundraising, and they can go on a website from time to time and put in a little $10, just like you mentioned about the way Obama and these people have done it. There are lessons to be learned. I think as we go along, there needs to be education. If we want to preserve our democracy, nothing against any particular political party or government or person. It's just that if you want to preserve your democracy, there are things you have to do. You have to purge the system now and then, especially when you see people are really taking advantage of it and begin excessive. You have to purge the system from time to time. You have to make changes from time to time to let the politicians know that they are the servants of the people. The people are not their servants. They are the servants of the people. And they are the people who are paying their salaries and ensuring that they have a reasonable standard of living. They need to look after the interests of the people. And if they're not doing that, if they're strayed away from that, it is important to change the government now and then. Bring them back in a few years' time, but it's always a good thing in any democracy to change the government from time to time so that they can respect that the power is really in the hands of the people. I'm just saying this just as we wind down, Dr. Andre, because the 10 o'clock hour is well upon us now. I don't know. I'm encouraged. The point I'm making tonight, I'm encouraged to see what is happening in terms of our democracy. I see people are beginning to move on the ground and to ask themselves questions and to take action and to asking, well, what can I do? And I see people are turning up to rallies now and contributing and showing that they enjoy the movements that are taking place. It is really encouraging to see that. And I hope it will continue. I hope whoever is organizing will get better organized and better structured on the ground so that, as you call the ground game, to bring people out when they need to come out, because people want to come now. They want to go. They want to be a part of history, because history is in the making. That is what happened in that snap election. The people made history by not turning up. They took a resolve not to turn up, and they did not turn up. They spoke a lot just from their silence, from their not voting. They sent out a very loud message. And so, Dr. Andre, in your closing remarks, I don't know what thoughts you want to leave with us as we go.
Yes, let me indicate that I thank you and Lambie and Sherwin for facilitating this exchange in this season of good cheer. I thank your listeners, whether on Facebook or social media or radio, who've taken the time off to listen to one lonely pilgrim spewing his guts, so to speak. But let me indicate that one of the ways to keep the diaspora interested and motivated and engaged is to establish the infrastructure or architecture, organizationally speaking, on the ground in terms of organizing, whether to raise funds, to have activities, because evidence of that will motivate persons abroad even more to dig into their savings, to dig into their pockets, to donate towards, for example, a reasonably priced laptop or two. The assurance that what they're donating will be used for the purposes set out in the request. That is important. I can indicate to you that a friend and I, we donated a television and a surround sound system to an institution. I will not give the name. And there was no record acknowledgement or receipt. And when the person who donated it with myself, we went down, the surround system was sitting contentedly at a bar, spewing music, while persons were imbibing Kubuli Bear and so on and so forth. So there has to be the infrastructure to tell people, to make people know that what they donate will go to the cause that they're donating for. That is very important. And there has to be a scrupulous efforts to reach across the board to every publican, to every sinner, to every leper, to every lady of the night. Those who are regarded as probably not as privileged as others, that they have a role to play in this. They've been playing a great role so far. But we have to continue reaching out and empower and encourage persons on the ground. And those of us in the diaspora, we have to maintain an atmosphere or an attitude of deference. We can criticize, but we have to remember that those who feel the heat are on the ground. So we have to be careful in how we couch our commentary or critique of what's happening. Because those on the ground can simply say, Gasso, I'm not going through that. Let me go and plant peas in Tobago instead. But I take solace in the fact, as I've said over and over again in different forms, in different language perhaps, as was it Lewis, what's his name, the poor fellow who died, American civil rights leader. Something is happening.
John Lewis.
John Lewis, something is happening. And he was right, something is happening. But we can't just stand up as bystanders and look at something is happening. We have to play our part in making something happen.
Right.
While we may expect gifts for Christmas, the one gift that will not be under the tree is good governance. For that, we have to work for. Thank you, Mr. G.
Yes, and thank you, Dr. Andre and Lambi and Sherwin and all of the persons who are with us on Facebook and listening to us in Radio Land on the internet and other platforms. Thank you so much for staying with us. I certainly agree with you in closing, Dr. Andre, that there has to be accountability. I mean, if people are going to, give some of their scarce resources, it's not like people have a lot of money. I mean, $10 is $20 a lot for some people. If they give you their $20, they want to know that it's being used for the proper cause. And so the accountability has to be there. You have to report to them how the money is spent. And you have to be telling them what the money is being used for so they can say, yes, I am happy to have my money used. My little $20, I'm happy to contribute it to that particular activity, to buying this or to paying for that, whether it's for buses. But the fact of the matter is, we see democracy at play in Dominica now. We see people are coming out, and you see the numbers are increasing, and as you can see, the enthusiasm is growing. This is all great for democracy. And what we'll hope to see is that the next time there is a rally, to see bigger numbers, a bigger groundswell, a lot more enthusiasm. But that would mean people have to contribute. The organizers have to organize, and they have to reach out to people and have to help people to contribute so that it can be successful. That is the way the democracy is going to triumph. It is people who are going to get together and make it happen. So I just want to thank everybody for being with us here tonight. And thank you, Dr. Andre, for a valuable contribution here tonight.
Thank you very much. And thank everybody. Have a great night's rest. And you can dream of a bright Christmas, if I may suggest.
Well, thank you very much for that. And Lambi, take care. Good night. Good night, Sherwin.
Thank you, Lambi.
Good night, everybody.
Hope you are feeling better.
All right. Bye for now.
Out my window, and I'm a thinking of tomorrow, and I'm a wondering what the future will be. Thinking of the children who are the victims of oppression, beaten down by worse and eaten up by starvation. I'm saying, when their ugly will be over, and the children can go